summarize some of the things that I wanted to say so that it can give to you people, the stakeholders, an idea on where the government is going. This seminar is quite timely because the government right now is in the midst of carrying out a major reform that will impact upon the mining and petroleum industry and in the way we do business here. But let me very quickly come to assure all our stakeholders that the government is very cognizant of the need to create a good, stable platform upon which everybody, all of us, can get into business in these industries and to be able to benefit out of it. So there may be a lot of uncertainties or fears arising out of uncertainty because stakeholders do not necessarily know which way the government is headed. But this sort of dialogue will help to enlighten all of us so that we remove the fear factor and proceed together to work it through, bed it down, and then conduct our businesses. So what I propose to do now is to just set the foundation of what sort of system we have at the moment, and then identify some of the flaws in it as we see it as a government, and then outline some of the kind of reform we should take, all with the for the purposes of establishing a good, mutually beneficial platform when we are conducting business in these industries. So looking at the current system as we have it at the moment for both mining and petroleum, we all know that we operate under a concession-based system where initially some prospecting licenses are given out. When some commercial reserves are found, a development license is given, and some project agreements are signed. Now, at that moment, the state's ownership of those resources are then transferred from the state 100% across to the hand of the licensee or the developer. That's the effect of it. And moments later, the developer, upon receiving full ownership of the resources, then grants an option back to the state. In the case of minerals, 30% option to buy back 30% equity in the project. In the case of petroleum, 22.5%. When that happens, then the state normally goes out into the international money market to look for money to help it to raise the money that is necessary to buy the equity that was offered to it. So that's the landscape that we have at the moment, and there are many other aspects and facets to it, but what is relevant for us for the purposes of discussion is the bit that I've just outlined. On top of that, it's the government that is doing business with private sector companies. So we are all subjected to different rules and regulations. The state has its own set of laws that governs the way the state goes out and does its business. And one of those requirements, we find it in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. It limits the state's ability to borrow beyond a certain limit. So up to November 9, 2019, the statutory limit for statutory borrowing as against gross domestic product was 35%. 35%, I think most of you are aware of that. And then in November 2019, the government, in passing the budget, also set about amending that legislation to increase the ceiling from 35% up to 45%. So we now have that, that's the ceiling under which we are operating. So in any given year, the government has to make sure that its total borrowings do not exceed that limit. And that's very relevant to how the government is now responding to trying to bring about some reforms because of the constraints that we have. Now, ordinarily, you don't go about changing things if they are working very well. Or if you've got a whole range of things going at the same time and a few of them are not working well, then your focus is on those areas where they're not working well and you set about trying to improve it so that future business can be conducted better to everybody's satisfaction. So the main reason why the state is setting about carrying out a series of legislative reforms at the moment in mining and petroleum is because we think that there's certain aspects of the legislative framework that we are working at the moment that is not operating to the benefit of the state and the citizens of this country, to whom we as political leaders obtain our mandate. And let me go through some of those, what I call mischiefs, those things that are not working right for the state, so that then you can understand that is our motivation for wanting to bring about some reform. Wow, I hadn't started and time is nearly up. Number one, as I said just moments ago, when we sign a project agreement and give a license, we lose our ownership to the resource without any compensation flowing back to the state. Now that is a really big anomaly because it flies against the face of the basic tenets of what I believe is a capitalistic democracy, where you consider right, then the value, a corresponding monetary value must flow in the opposite direction. Here we forfeit all our ownership to resources, to the developer, and no compensation comes back. That's the first big glaring anomaly to which not many people have addressed. You know, it's the elephant sitting in the room, and nobody talks about it. Then the next anomaly is the requirement to buy back. Something which you own 100% yesterday, but gave it away FOC, and then have to buy back tomorrow for a lot of money. That's anomalous from our thinking. Then we have to go to the money markets. That's the third anomaly, to borrow substantial amounts of money to finance our back-in. That adds to our debt stockpile. What I've learned is that, upon becoming Minister for Petroleum recently, is that the state always carries a huge stockpile of historical debts that's there already. So if the limit was 35%, or say now 45%, your historical debt's already sitting at 42%. Now that brings about the fourth mischief, thing that's wrong with the current scheme of laws. We need to go out and borrow money annually to finance any deficit budget for development, economic development purposes. We need to do that. But you are playing within, when the historical debts already sit at 42% on a ceiling of 45%, you have a leeway of 3% only. That is because some of those debts are added by state going out and seeking project financing for commercial enterprise, not for deficit financing for its annual budgets. So that brings about the fifth anomaly. The state's ability to finance social and welfare development in this country through deficit financing is reduced almost to nothing. In a space of 45%, annually we are left with about 2 or 3%. How much money can you borrow? You know, so there's a lot of lost opportunity to the state not being able to go out and borrow meaningfully to finance its deficit financing on any annual budget. So that's why we feel constrained. We can't do much. I think that sort of limitation and borrowings and the requirement for the state to go back, seek financing, borrow, destroys economic development opportunities for this country. Also, the state feels that the current scheme does not maximize within reason the state's ability to make some more money to meet all the challenges we have in this country. So those are the mischiefs. Now you can see why. You can develop an appreciation and understanding. If you are sitting in the chair that we are sitting on the state side and you look at the landscape, these are the challenges, these are the problems that you see. So how can you go about reforming it without threatening, without hurting other people in the mining and petroleum space, without discouraging investment? So the remedies that we are looking at is that, firstly, we have to move away from this concession-based scheme that we are operating under and move into production sharing arrangements for both mining and petroleum. There's some questions about whether it's doable in mining, but I think those are logistical things, and it's doable in a general sense, and we can talk the details later. One of the remedies will be, in this reform, will ensure that state ownership of the resources is maintained from exploration to production to the point of export. And it's at the point of export that the benefits can be shared between everybody. And the state will not have to borrow ever again. And therefore, destroy or build up its debt stockpile and take away its development opportunities through deficit financing and all of that. So in that kind of scenario, we see in such a reform that the developers will have to bear the full cost of production from exploration to production. Now, this sounds onerous, but my short response is this. When you look at it, it looks frightening, but anything can be financed so long as you have a good commercial proven reserve. That is sufficient security. Everything else is numbers, and you can work out the numbers, and you make sure that everybody walks away from the table with a fair share of the production. So whilst the developers are expected to bear the full cost of production, we think that it's not such an onerous thing. The security, the ultimate security we have is the reserves that can to financiers. So that's the general landscape we're looking at, and the immediate impact of this is this. The state would not have to borrow again. That means that whatever borrowing capacity we have within the ceiling imposed by the Fiscal Responsibility Act, taking into account historical debts, if there's 4%, 5%, that space will only be utilized by the government for its deficit financing of its annual budgets. We won't have government businesses coming in and competing in that space with the need to deliver goods and services in the social for the benefit of the people of this country. So that's going to free that space up completely, and that for the state is a very, very positive. It's a big gain when you remove that debt requirement, debt financing requirement for projects, commercial projects from the state. That's a big, big plus. So very quickly, let me run down. We're going to do some structural adjustments. We're going to do some structural adjustments and create the operating vehicles and agencies that will have to carry the responsibility or share it out between them. The organic law that we now have sitting in Parliament only aims to achieve that outcome, which is to create the operating vehicles and the agencies. It's not going into other details such as the operational side of the mining and petroleum things. That will be in the next stage when we introduce legislations later next year. So this year, the organic law that will be introduced will just create the state's operating vehicles.
If I can ask you to wind down and we'll discuss a little bit more.
Okay. So we're going to create Kumul Petroleum under this organic law. We'll take care of all petroleum business, Kumul Petroleum Holdings Limited, Wapusong is here. Take care of all commercial aspects of petroleum in PNG. We're going to put the responsibility for mining into Kumul Mining Holdings Limited. And the regulatory part, as we know, we're going to create a National Petroleum Authority that will take care of all the responsibility, regulatory responsibilities. And in addition to that, on the petroleum side, we'll also create National Energy Authority that will be responsible for policy setting for energy, all kinds of energy, sources of energy, and also the management of DMO. Any provisions that are made for domestic market obligation will be managed, channeled through the National Energy Authority. So their roles and functions will be largely explained in the organic law that we have. And then once this organic law is in place, hopefully by early next year, then we will have a number of legislations that will go into the details of how we're going to be carrying out the entire business, the entire spectrum of business. So one key thing that will be running through your mind as I come to the end now is this: how are we going to share the production? What sort of assurances and guarantee will you as the minister give us now that there's going to be benefit for all of us and there's space for mutual existence in these industries? Well, that's a matter for the legislations, the bills, which we haven't drafted yet. And I envisage that this, as to how we share, will not be contained. There'll be some guidance in legislations that we will write, but most of the details will be a matter for private contract to be negotiated between the parties. There can't be any imposition by the state. We appreciate that because it's got to meet your internal rate of return for the investors. It's got to be economical. And also, the state has its own criteria for making sure that any investment meets the national investment, internal investment returns, rate of return. So those are things that we will work out when we're dealing with the legislation down the track. But by and large, I see a landscape where it will be the same down the track as it is now, where parties can negotiate how to share the benefits coming out of a project. There'll be a matter for contract, so it won't be, I don't envisage that we will legislate it. And the Prime Minister did ask me that question recently. Prime Minister James Marape said, are you going to legislate how we're going to share? And I said, Prime Minister, I don't know yet, but I doubt if we will legislate it because every project varies. The economic circumstances vary from year to year. Project location, risk, production costs, etc., vary from project to project. So it will be very difficult for us to be prescriptive in our legislation. So we might have to leave it to negotiation. So that's where we rested our conversation. Now, finally, there has been some sense of unease. Now, Richard, do I have 2 minutes or 3 minutes?
No. Sorry, Minister, what I'd like to do is, I'll give you that opportunity later.
Okay.
We've got a couple more speakers that have some limited time, and we'll come back.
All right.
That's a promise. All
right. So let me just wind up by saying that we did do a recent amendment that's caused some consternation amongst our stakeholders. I don't see there's anything serious, and I will explain later.